Two, one. Good morning, good evening, or good day, everybody. I'm covering all bases. It's just after school time in the morning. Here it is evening in northern Queensland, where my guest Andy Ridley is seated. We've both just been admiring each other's lockdown hair, so hopefully you'll forgive us. He's sensibly seated in the dark. Andy, we've known each other a number of years personally. When I first met you, you were involved in a little project called Earth Hour, which you were co-founder of. That's obviously something that went global and is very, very well known. You've now moved to Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef. Were you tired of trying to save the world, or did you want something more locally focused?
Hey, just as a starting point, in Australia we haven't been in lockdown for a while, so this is not lockdown. So
that's just your personal style, is it?
I did do it myself, obviously, but
You've adopted Australian bogum culture, have you?
It's actually, you can't see the bit, but it actually goes right down the back there. No, I'm lucky enough to work on the Great Barrier Reef now, and we've been setting this project up for maybe 4 years in January. And yeah, it's an amazing spot. Obviously, I always wanted to work on the reef, since I was knee high to a grasshopper, so a long while ago, and finally got my chance 4 years ago to get this thing up and running. It's taken some hard work, but we're kind of getting there now.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in the news just recently. Only in the past couple of weeks, a report came out saying 50% of the reef has been lost, which is the kind of news we always want to get out there so people are aware of the threats. But you also, I don't know about you, but I'm always nervous that people just throw their hands in the air and go, well, it's not worth saving, it's gone.
Yeah, the thing about the reef, but I think I agree with you. It's actually, it's one of the great conservation challenges is that often you raise more money by having the gun against the head of whatever it is. But I think it has a parallel risk of de-inspiring and demotivating people. So that balance is really difficult. With the Great Barrier Reef, it is a nuanced story. It's not it's dead. It's not it's alive. I mean, even numbers like 50% are really difficult to validate. In the sense of not that there isn't a massive risk to the reef, because there is a massive risk to the reef. We've had sequential bleachings in 2016 and 2017. We had a big bleaching, but with a lot less mortality last year. Was that this year? I can't remember now. So these risks are real, but you can go onto one reef and you can find a wall on that reef being amazing, and then the lagoon being damaged and the tops having regrowth on it. We've got a very nuanced picture. And the thing about the Great Barrier Reef is that it's so massive. It's the same size as Germany or Japan. It's 2,300 kilometers in length. So being able to kind of get your eyes on that size of territory is really hard. So you've got the risks. Climate change.
So basically, you're trying to help save a nation, in effect. I mean, if you look at it from a size perspective.
I think what we're trying to do is, because Great Barrier Reef is sort of becoming a poster child for climate change. I think what we're actually really trying to do is create it as a point of inspiration for change. I think it's a different thing. And the poster child for climate change is Reef is dead, or is nearly dead. Whereas inspiration for change for me is Reef is under incredible levels of threat, but it's still extraordinary, and it should inspire us to do everything that we can do to protect and conserve it. And that's a global challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think offsetting what I said, that the negative news that came out again very, very recently, for me, what was amazing news was a whole new reef being discovered. And I don't know if it was part of the project you're involved with. I know it was scientists, but they found a reef isolated from the main bodies of the Great Barrier Reef, which is, of course, not a single unit. It's many, many disparate pieces to put together. But I don't know how many tourist boats there must be out there in a normal year of normal international tourism. But
Well, no, I mean, this is the thing. People need to know the reef is massive. I mean, everyone knows, right? But it's 40% of the reef has never been surveyed. 40%.
wow.
And probably in the last 10 years, less than 5% would have actually had eyes on it. And in the last year, it'll be less.
Even with that swarming mass of tourists, and I've seen it out of Cairns when you're there, or further towards Cape Tribulation, perhaps, and it looks almost like a traffic jam of snorkeling dive vessels going out, and they're only getting 5%.
Well, I mean, even out of somewhere like Cairns, you have about 3 million people going out to the reef every year. But even then, even the biggest of those boats, they'll go out to a single area of reef, and they'll actually swim in an area that'll be around 200 square meters.
Right.
So when you think about that, and it's the size, the area of Germany or Italy or Japan, then it's tiny, right? So
Did you deliberately choose the Axis forces from World War II there, or is that just coincidence?
Yeah, and
is this some unconscious bias from your schooling in England?
Opportunity to mention the Axis forces, I'll go straight there. Yeah, no, hang on, Malaysia.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry about
that. There you are, your Japanese beer. Omedetou gozaimasu. そのビールは美味しいですね.
Yeah.
Yes, you'd agree. Okay, so before we get any further into this, we do a bit of a Rorschach block test, but with questions, just so people can get a feeling for who you are when you're put on the spot. So I've got 7 quick questions for you here. Straight off the cuff, you've obviously had no warning these are coming. So first off, why did you leave Wham?
Because how is it that George is getting so much when...
All right. What's the most dangerous animal on the reef?
Oh, that's a great question. So I had this great conversation with a friend of mine called Lyle, and a friend of mine called Richard, and the one that they're the most freaked out about is giant squid. So if there was one animal that they would be the most alarmed to be caught by, it was giant squid. They were talking about doing rebreather diving. So, they go down the side of a reef. It would take them half an hour to get to 120 meters, take them 6 hours to get to the top again. It's very dark down there. They've got torches, but they reckon it's the most, what's the word they use, rapacious of animals.
And are they recorded?
It freaks me out. It freaks me out. I've never dived that deep and never would either. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I know that there's the giant squid. There's now also the colossal squid, and what's extraordinary is how infrequently we've either found or caught these. I mean, everything else seems to be trawled up, but we know they're out there, and the scars of sperm whales that show that some of these things are, I mean, terrifying. Those old myths of the Kraken, perhaps inspired in some part by these.
In my mind, what the name of that squid is, one that they get off like the Californian coast, which is not as big as giant squid. It's kind of like about the size of a human, maybe a bit shorter.
Yeah.
Really, really great one. YouTube it; it's mental.
Yeah, I mean, once you get into the squids and the octopi, I mean, they are bonkers, some of the forms they take, and then terrifying as hell. There's that one, I don't know if you've seen it, has jointed legs, which is quite jointed tentacles, so it looks almost like a spider. Really funky.
The other answer people would normally say around here, I mean, there's lots of things that kill you, it's Australia, but the Irukandji jellyfish, the little tiny one.
Yeah.
It's so small you can barely see it. So that's not very pleasant. And then of course, if you're close into the shore, the crocs. But yeah, they're.
This is where you work in conservation and not tourism marketing, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It does amuse me that when you're outside Australia, everybody's perception is always sounds terrifying. You've got all these highly venomous snakes. You've got the most venomous spider in the world. There's these enormous crocodiles that are basically like busters with teeth. You've got sharks, all these things that just seem serial killers, apparently, the wolf backpacker murderers. And then, of course, the moment they arrive in Australia, everybody's going, mate, are you wearing sunscreen? Because that's going to kill you faster than anything. And I think Europeans in particular are just like, why do you keep talking about sunscreen? And after about an hour, they go, as they're glowing, oh, I see.
They have no skin left.
That's it, yeah. I mean, how often do you actually see snakes?
Oh, very rarely. I think I was doing a walk behind a park behind a wildlife, like a reserve behind where I live, and I was walking out there and I think I either saw a taipan or a legless lizard. Wasn't sure which one it was. They look a little bit similar. One would just feel embarrassed about the legless bit.
Yeah, I would not poke it to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't know, you just leave it be, yeah. Okay, so most dangerous animal on a reef we've covered. Who's the most dangerous person in the world?
Oh, right now.
Yes, that just changed a few days ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the next, yeah, this is a slight nagging worry in my head about the transition period, I'd say.
Yeah. If you could bring back one extinct species, which one would you choose?
Oh, lovely question. I reckon I would like to see. My kids would like the megalodon, obviously.
Yes.
Although they're convinced that it's not extinct. And I would say some of the giant animals that used to frequent the Australian continent, like the giant kangaroos or the wombat that was like
the protodon.
Yeah. All those crazy giant Australian marsupials.
Yeah, and there was a giant goanna as well. That was much bigger than the Komodo dragon. It was about the weight of a horse.
And there was a giant croc as well. But I don't know if that was Australia or if that might have been Saharan. So 27 meters.
Saurasuchus or Saurasuchus. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It was again just ridiculous the size of it.
And I think there was a meat
giant crocs. We don't need more.
There was a meat-eating giant kangaroo, and there was a marsupial lion.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Kind of cool.
The Australian megafauna was fantastic, and it died out in human history, possibly human impact. Okay, so Finding Nemo, is that good, bad, or indifferent in terms of its effect on the reef?
Oh, I'd say good. In general, I mean, obviously, it meant that a lot of people went to go and catch a clownfish and put it in the aquarium, but it probably brought a lot of people's attention, so that's a bad thing, obviously. Yeah. But there's a lot of probably a lot of kids grew up wanting to go to the Great Barrier Reef or knowing it's important. But of course, I'm going to totally get this wrong, but of course the clownfish has a weird, like the actual true story of Nemo would be really weird, right? Because I think if the mother, if the dominant animal is the mother, is the female, and then the female dies, and then the male turns into a female, and then mates with the son or the daughter. No, the son. Anyway, it's super weird, and that would be
Alabama style love. Sounds
like a really different movie, hey?
Probably not made by Disney.
I got this Russ who tells that far better than I do, but that's been a very strange movie, and maybe not Disney.
But yeah, I mean that's the extraordinary thing. Like you said, people watched it and said, "You know what I want? I will now want a clownfish of my own in an
aquarium in my house."
The entire premise of that movie is the clownfish does not want to be in the aquarium. You've taken it away from where it wants to be. So it shows how little people actually pick up on the lessons you're trying to get back. Okay, if you got to enact one national policy in Australia, what would it be?
Net zero by 2040.
By 2040? Yeah. Do you think that's achievable?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, all things, maybe pre-corona, you could say, no way. But actually, one thing about corona, the biggest thing for me about corona is, for all those who are saying the economy can't change, et cetera, in 2 months, the whole global economy was forced to change and did. You know, whether we're talking flying, whether we're talking looking at home, or we're talking like all these dramatic changes. Where like this is back in the early days, and I think there's so much shitty stuff about corona, obviously, and you're in the UK, so you know that much more than we do in Australia. But the idea of the capacity of humanity to change was proven, and one of the great arguments against action on climate change was the economic damage. You know, so you might lose 2% of the global economy. Where are you now? So net zero is possible. Net zero is possible quicker than that if we actually really went for it. But it is policy,
Yeah.
and
I think China's just announced they're going for carbon neutrality quite much earlier than people were presuming.
they've gone. I think they've done net zero by 2050, and previously
2050, yeah.
I think they didn't have a target. But to get to net zero by 2050 means that by 2040 you've got to be your trajectory is clearly set. So really, if you think about if you were trying for net zero by 2040 without getting too dull about it, what you're doing is setting trajectory. So you're saying, right, how are we going to do it? And maybe you're 1 or 2 years either way, but you're setting a trajectory that is aggressively cutting your carbon emissions. And if you think about someone like Australia, I think last month it's all a bit schizophrenic, right? Last month they were announcing this massive hydrogen plant, which would be powered by wind and solar, building over in West Australia, and it's designed to power Singapore.
Right.
So you know, there's lots of technology that's kicking in around how you move power. You know, that's one piece. But we were talking to a company last week, solar company, and they were showing us the exponential decrease in size of the size of solar panels to create the same amount of power. So, you start with, one the size of a car, and then you start, like, we're at this size, and within 5 years, you're looking at all that about that size will create the same as one that currently exists. So there's so many things happening. You just, but it does take, it takes change. I think probably one of the most powerful parts of that is people like BlackRock and JP Morgan and those very massive companies that have been investing in fossil fuels, the world's biggest investors in fossil fuels, pulling out of those markets rapidly now, and changes everything.
But that's huge. And again, this is good news in conservation, but it's so hard to get people's attention with it. I mean, I remember seeing that written and I thought, this is actually big, but because it's not one of those compelling images of an orangutan in a burnt out.
Yeah.
I don't think it quite reached the public consciousness as it should have. And it affects everything from the Great Barrier Reef through to this UK weather, which I'm sitting in right now. We had a beautiful summer in the UK.
Yeah.
6 months of summer. I was a little pro-coal at the end of that. It was so nice. But the climate change is obviously very real. It affects every single person, but then it does affect things like the reef as well, obviously. I'm going to come back to something you said there, but I got one last of these quick questions for you here. So you work in conservation. You've also got your own travel company, Matson and Ridley. Are you addicted to poverty?
Yeah. Yeah. No, Matson and Ridley, obviously, mainly run by Tammy, far more competent wife, and mostly African safaris, and of course everything's hibernating in terms of travel business. You would know more than. So that's been dramatic. I think in Australia we've had because we've been so lucky in terms of the amount of corona that we've had here, the domestic travel scene, I think, will be quite strong, especially within a couple of months. Touch wood. But yeah, my God. And the thing is, and as you would know, so the kind of travel that we're interested in is all about supporting those communities that are essentially safeguarding the areas in which they work. So you would know that from African safaris that basically, and from natural selection that basically without those communities achieving an income, it's very hard for them to do the role to safeguard the things bringing in the money. It's really, really tough. So it's shitty.
Well, I've said for 20 something years, you never meet a starving conservationist.
Yeah, right.
It's
true,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, you've got kids as well. If you're standing by the last rhino in the world and your children's bellies are rumbling, you have a bit of a dilemma on your hands.
Yeah.
Thing. So these economies, so with that, with tourism obviously greatly reduced to the reef, and that actually gives you, I suppose, a reference point. Is tourism good or harmful to the reef? Or is it, again, it's nuanced? I'm guessing you're about to tell me it's nuanced.
No, I don't think it's harmful. I think going to such a minute area of the reef. I mean, you'll always get although it's incredibly hardcore management of tourism in Australia anyway. But the area that it goes. So I was telling you before, if you go on a boat out of Cairns and you're one of those really big ones, it's like 300 people on it. You're going out to the reef, you get to swim in an area that's about 200 square meters in an area that is 35 million square kilometers. Kilometers or hectares, I can't remember now. But anyway, it's the size of
100 meters by 100 meters, and it starts getting. Is that a square kilometer? I get confused.
Anyway, it's the same size as one of the active pads, as you know, right? So so I don't think you could quite easily. You could probably argue around flights. That's probably one of the areas where you'd say, flying in commission. But I'd also argue that one of the great things, for me anyway, around the current challenges. One of the few things that's quite good is the sudden dramatic drop in business flights, which were wholly unnecessary in most cases. So I don't think tourism is a threat to the reef. I think the value of having someone come here and look at that place and fall in love with it, and then take that story home is incredible. I definitely think that the other part to that is the more people value the place, the more likely it is to be protected and looked after as well. So, an African.
That's exactly what we say in the safari world is we're not showing off the place that we live and love. We're acting as a matchmaker. We're the Tinder of conservation. It's like, right, you and you fall in love.
Yeah.
And because only I think once you love something will you look after it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that with the reef, and when you're out, we're out on the reef a lot, and we're out a lot on like in a variety of boats, with a variety of different people. But there's that certain look in people's eyes when they first actually see what a reef looks like, and they've been in that one world. They're always afraid they might get eaten by a shark, and they're not going to get eaten by a shark. But there's a fear of going in the water the first time if you've never been in the ocean, and you've heard all the stories. And people go in the water, and as I said before, there are places here that are wonderlands.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Okay, so that actually leads very neatly into one of my other questions. This is a regular segment on Deep in the Bush. Well, obviously, I mean, you know that I'm very interested in conservation and climate change. Obviously, probably the biggest threat to the reef. That's something which I feel is a huge problem. I've seen you in cycling gear in Cape Town. We've been drunk together in Marrakesh. But right now, you're not talking to me. You're talking to Wayne. Wayne is from Fort Wayne in Indiana. landlocked. He's never been to Australia, not particularly interested in it. And the fact that he's named Wayne and he's from Wayne was what impressed Brenda, and he's pretty happy with that, even though Brenda's not his wife. He's worried about his middle getting bigger, whether he's going to get a tax return, and that his softball team lost again. Great Barrier Reef sounds like it's somewhere in China. Why should Wayne from Wayne in Indiana care?
Well, firstly, Wayne, I'm really sorry about the result of the weekend. But it is time to unify and put the anger aside.
So now we know who Wayne voted for.
Yeah, maybe. So I don't know. It is an important question. There's the sort of the kind of the science of it. You know, if you think about reefs, is about a third of all marine animals spend some point of their life on reefs around the world. So as you lose the reef, you're starting to lose very, very large parts of of the natural world, ecosystems of species, and that has, as with everything, has a knock-on effect. And we don't know what the knock-on effect is across everything else, but you lose a third of the species out of the ocean, and you're in shit.
So these are fish and other marine species that come and have lay their eggs or live young at the reef for them to grow a little bit there in the safety of the reef before moving back out.
Yeah, or come back to the reef. Yeah, but basically frequent the reef during that time. Yeah. So that's kind of one big one. Lose a third of the species in the oceans. I think there's obviously the aesthetic thing of, when you look at something that's just like losing forests or losing the great natural wonders of the world. That's the Great Barrier Reef is one of them, but it is probably the biggest, most symbolic of them all, most iconic. It's the canary in the coal mine for all the reefs, if you think about it like that. Then maybe something a bit more human, which is there are, many thousands and thousands and thousands of people who work up and down the reef with jobs and livelihoods and families, and that all rely on the health of the reef. And then I guess it's not just that their livelihoods rely on the health of the reef because they work in tourism or fishing, whatever it is.
Fishing, yeah.
Yeah, they're somebody very similar to you will be out there fishing on the weekends, and I'm sure if you sat down in a pub with them, you'd have a lot to chew the cud, and you'd like each other, and these are good people. So there's another piece to it, and I think that what you do is what we do wherever we are this side of the world. What we do here affects what happens in where was he living, in Indiana, was it?
Indiana, yeah.
So even here in Australia, we have pretty lax attitude towards emissions, and so whatever we do here will affect what happens in Indiana. So you actually need a mutual level of shit. We better have each other's back. And then if you're going kind of down to America and Australia, they're long-term great allies that have put together in different wars and done different things together, and therefore there should be a brotherhood and a sisterhood around what we want our countries and democracies to look like in the future. And these things are all about stability to some extent. So a stable world will not be one under a massively bad climate scenario. And I think so that list sort of goes on and on. But I mean, long story short, Great Barrier Reef will be protected, conserved, and saved by the actions of a globe, and not by just Australia. But by God, it's on the shoulders of Australia to make sure we do everything.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I don't know if you feel the same way as me, but Australia seems particularly bad at conservation. I mean, there's that, like you said, really good policing on how the tourism's done so they don't damage the reef. That's great. But there's the coal mine, the Ajani coal mine, is that what it's called? That's being proposed. Right, and the runoff from that would come in and potentially affect the reef, or almost definitely affect the reef. And of course, you have one party saying we have to support this mine because of the jobs it will create, and then the other party saying we have to support this mine because it's a big industry. And conservation's left going, well, shit. And yet there's jobs on the reef, like you said.
It's a remarkable situation because, firstly, I would suspect that, like, this is the Galilee Basin, the Port Galilee Basin, and there's not just the Darney, there's a whole load of thermal coal mines that could be built there. When we were talking earlier on about BlackRock and JP Morgan and those kind of, and what the banks are doing is that now, to a greater and greater extent, no one will invest in these projects because they know that within 10 years they're going to be null and void. Now, the challenge for Queensland government, the challenge for Australian government, is you can back these projects, but what happens if the rest of the world decides, as we hope they will, and now the presidency's just changed, so America will be back into the Paris Agreement, and it seems to be high on the agenda, and pretty much every leader's statement around the world, welcoming Joe Biden in as president-elect, has mentioned climate change in their speech. What happens what happens to the Queensland economy and to the investments given from Australia into something like Adani, which is an extraordinarily large mine for thermal coal? Not coking coal, thermal coal, so power coal for power station. So the whole global economy tilts, like I suspect it will over the next decade, towards how fast can we get to zero, and then how fast can we get to zero. So not only is the whole thing of Adani just an incredibly bad idea from an emissions perspective, but it also carries incredibly high risk, in my view. A high risk for Australian taxpayer, high risk for Australians, and it's just a really dumb idea. Now the challenge then is that there are communities that need jobs or need investment and need. They don't just need, there'll be green jobs coming along. They need a plan, and they need to have a solid, this is what's going to happen, and this is how we're going to counter that, and that's going to take political willing and real thought to do
well,
that.
I mean, what jobs would you propose in that area? Because this is again, of course, the reef is interlinked with the systems, the ecological systems on land. Runoff from rivers are going to have a huge impact on the reef. So I think, again, people tend to think of conservation as, okay, we're protecting the reef, but of course, protecting the reef is about thinking of what are happening with emissions as far away as India, what's happening here on land in Australia with the runoff from there, what's happening with offshore fishing. Are those fish being hit so hard that they can't come back and spawn in the reef? So, because I think sometimes people go, oh, you're biting off more than you can chew here, or stay in your lane, as the Americans like to say. You protect the reef, by opposing the mine.
I think this is the great challenge for conservation, though. I think, 21st century conservation organization is not going to be the same as a WWF or CNC. And it's not to bag them out. It's just, those models were formed in the 1960s. And, fundamentally in 2020, we need to scale up conservation at a level that has never been done before. And in order to do that, you have to have an approach which is going to be far more like the shared economy kind of approach than it's going to be, give us your money and we'll go and deal with it. Because fundamentally, apart from the fact that hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked at that level, and that's not necessarily a criticism of it, it just hasn't worked, so the model doesn't work. It might work in some areas, but fundamentally, you've got to find a way of being able to build scalable conservation models, which enable and engage people who are in lockdown in Manchester or Bristol or in Cape Town or in New York, and and in a way that is more than money. So whether or not you're looking at how you deploy things like the circular economy, where you're reducing material use on a massive level, or whether you're thinking about the use of the combined power of big data and how you might analyze that, or whether you're looking at how you put citizen scientists in the water on the Great Barrier Reef or in other reefs around the world. All this stuff is also that has to be trialed and thought about and moved on quickly. And to your point about, are you biting off more than you can chew? Well, it's back to the Earth Hour model was always about, don't ask us what we're going to do, but what are you going to do? It's the Kennedy thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that that's really where conservation has to get to now. It's like you in so many aspects of your life, you can change things that happen. Going back to the corona thing, even some of the practices that have changed now, commuting, for example.
Yeah.
The reduction in commuting, not only is that fucking awesome because commuting sucks.
Yes.
It really does. I mean,
yeah.
how many years of my life did I waste commuting? Years. It sucked. It doesn't mean you always have to do it on Zoom or wherever else, but just business flights, all this stuff that just became a habit. This, thoughtful ways of working our way through some of these issues are sitting right in front of us, and we have proved that some of them work really well.
With that, and I want to come back to your citizen science project, but it was a question that I did have here was, with the slowdown in air traffic and sea traffic, shipping traffic obviously has drastically slowed down as well. Have there been any noticeable effects on the reef, or do those effects take too long to see?
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think you sometimes go to dive sites that are being frequented all the time, and then you go to them and there's maybe more wildlife around. It's possible, but I don't think there's probably new wildlife. I just think it's just there's less noise, so there's more animals around. I mean, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, emissions will definitely be or they are down. It's not down, they are down, aren't they? So. But can you see a direct effect on the reef? I don't think so, but there's some smarter people who would answer that question better than me, but I don't think so.
Okay. No, I mean, it's cute. I mean, if we had some sort of, I mean, this is the first global lockdown, I think the most significant restriction of movement probably since World War II.
Yeah, definitely.
And even then you had so much military movement going on. This is, again, very, very different. We've knocked ourselves back a few hundred years in terms of how we're moving around. And I think there are reports of things like that. The bird migrations seem to have, are getting through. There's been a lot of positives for nature from it, and it'd be interesting to see. And as I said, sometimes these knock-on effects actually take a while to register. You don't get some years' time and say, oh, well, we've got this many 4-year-old fish, a higher proportion.
Well, do you mind it? I mean, I was just looking at the travel schedule and going, that was like hell on earth.
Yeah, I went from March was the last time I traveled. I went on a safari, I led a safari into Botswana.
Yeah.
I came back and I was bracing myself for the onslaught. Normally I'd be in the US 2-3 times a year, back to Australia once a year, Singapore, Manila, Hong Kong once a year, all to promote safaris.
Yeah.
And then obviously I'd be on safari 4 or 5 times a year and have to reintroduce myself to the kids every time I got home.
Yeah.
So I got to travel less this year, and about 3 months into zero travel, I was incredibly frustrated, felt very wing-clipped. But that was under a strict lockdown, and I don't think we as humans have evolved to never leave the cave. Like at some point, you've got to go out and get chased by a mammoth. You need your pulse raised, and not frustration. I mean, try being locked down with a 2-year-old. That's what they should have done in Guantanamo. Forget all of those waterboarding, anything. If you want to be truly inhumane, lock somebody in with a 2-year-old. I'm not the father I wish I was.
My 2 weren't too bad. I got Shep's 7 tomorrow, and Cello is 11 weeks time. But they weren't too bad. I mean,
right. We got 2 and 4, and I reverted to being a toddler as well, to stand up screaming fights because they knocked over my Lego or whatever it was. But that was that strict lockdown. Right now, the form of lockdown we've got for a month here in the UK again,
I feel massively sorry for your wife if you got your 2 kids and
She handled it with grace and aplomb, but yeah, as it is now, that being able to send them to school, and so it's not a huge strain. I wasn't heading out to nightclubs anyway, so I'm not. It's not like, you know, my disco gear is mouldering in the wardrobe. There's not really any change. We can still get takeaway delivered. They still deliver gin.
Yeah, right.
A form of lockdown where you can get out.
You still wear your hot pants anyway, so.
There's a reason we only show waist up.
Yeah, true that.
It's too cold for hot pants here. That was a nice little
segue.
Conservation, yeah. Okay, so I must have had another question here that was actually conservation. Oh yes, no, spurred by the video you showed me just before we started this. So nice to get one from you that was not pornographic. Your citizen science project. While you describe that, I'm going to see if I'm smart enough to figure out how to put one up.
So this is an example of a banner. Click on a banner to show it on the screen.
Yeah, here we go. That's what I wanted. All right, so that is the link for people. Tell them what this video is going to show them.
Okay, so we actually comes about some of your questions, which is basically when there was sequential bleachings on the Great Barrier Reef in 2016 and 2017.
So maybe you need to explain what sequential bleachings are, or just what a bleaching is.
So you'll have seen stories going around the world about coral reef bleaching, which is when the reef goes white, and often the news says the reef dies. Now, with some bleaching, if it lasts for a long period of time, the coral does actually die. But it can, if it's a short one, and we had mass bleaching across much of the Great Barrier Reef this year, but it was very short, and so the reef, the coral didn't die mostly. It was very low mortality. But in 2016, 2017, there was a big bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef and on many, many reefs all over the world. And it was a global story, and, you know, it was sort of the kind of the reef is dead kind of story. Anyway, it did have a massive effect. And after the second, there was one in 2016 and one in 2017, there was an emergency conference held in Townsville, which is south of where I am now. And all the top reef scientists were there, and some other less competent people like myself. And one of the things that came out of it was there was a desire to get what they call reconnaissance data. So because the reef is so massive, some say it's as large as all 3 of the axis powers divided by 3.
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, so anyway, it's very large. So because it's so large and so much of it doesn't get eyes on it very frequently, much of the kind of analysis of what's actually going on is done by modeling. So being able to ground truth that modeling becomes more and more important, especially as things change so regularly now. So it almost became brief. You know, how would you get broad scale reconnaissance across as much of the Great Barrier Reef as possible? Knowing that to do that, normally you'd need kind of like $1 billion research fleet, and we don't have $1 billion. So actually what we did was we're working with the University of Queensland, with the Marine Park Authority here, and with the Australian Institute for Marine Science and various other people, particularly with tourism operators, water scholars. We basically have created we've created a particular project called the Great Reef Census. The Great Reef Census is kind of a motley flotilla of boats made up of research vessels, of tourism boats, of liveaboard dive boats, of white boats, of super yachts, of tugs, all sorts that are going up and down or going around the reef. And we've tasked them, we're trying to get to this year about between 100 and 150 of what we call the key source reefs. The Great Barrier Reef. So that's all the way far up into the north and out into the Swains, which is this if you look on Google Earth, you'll see a map of the Great Barrier Reef. You can see like there's this big bulk of reefs down the southern end called the Swains, and they're 13 or 15 hours steaming out from land, so a long way out, masses and masses. And so we have currently started on October the 8th, and it'll finish somewhere in mid-December. We have about 30, 35 different vessels, all sorts, as mentioned, out there trying to do a really basic baseline survey of as many of those pinpointed reefs as possible. And this year it's a trial, so we just thought, well, can we actually do this? Will it actually work? And so far so good. It's a fully mental project because all sorts of things come into it never thought of before, and
also, of course, the people that report things that are probably impossible, and you've got to politely accept it.
Well, the way it works is that you've got a if you take an average reef, let's say an average reef, as you said earlier on, the Great Barrier Reef is made up of 3,000 to 4,000 smaller reefs, right? So if you take, say you have
the forest is made up of trees. So
I hadn't, but yes. So you've got let's say you've got a reef that's 4 kilometers long. You'll have the windward side or the wild side, often very hard to survey. You'll have the leeward side, often where the lagoons are, normally pretty easy to survey. And then you've got a transition zone on either end or a pressure point on either end. Often where you'll find a bigger animal, often where if anyone's diving, it's often the best place to dive. The ideal with a Great Reef Census is to be able to get a survey on each of those 4 bits minimum.
Right.
The survey is basically a meter, going along with a GoPro or something like a GoPro and taking a photograph, a seascape photograph every 10 meters. So the word reconnaissance is really the right word. So you're not looking for like super detail. You're basically looking to see from a reconnaissance level, what does this reef look like? Does it look good? Does the back look good? Does the front look good? Does the top, bottom?
So it's not even about the actual species that they're recording. It's the reef. No. So you're surveying the trees, not the animals that live in them.
Yeah, right. So
okay.
We don't know. Like, this is the first time we've done it. So we're like, okay, we want broad scale reconnaissance for as many of these pinpointed reefs as possible. Then next year we'll scale up again. It's back to that kind of shared economy model. We want to scale up again and try and get between 300 and 500 reefs and open source the platform and the technology and the methodology to other reefs around the world. So if other people want to do it, they can do it.
I see, yeah. So, and of course, for a lot of, if you're a tourist on the reef, it's just what you'd be doing anyway. You're just filming with your GoPro as you go along, but they're just sharing that with you rather than.
Yeah. So we've this year.
It's not like homework. It's not a chore that you're giving people.
It's definitely not a chore. It's like basically, if you're a competent snorkeler, you can do it.
Right.
And this year we've mainly been trialing it with people that we know. People who are dive masters or who work on tourism boats, or people who know the reef reasonably well. But the idea is to try and learn what we need to learn this year and then scale it up again next year. So that's what we're up to, and it's going on at the moment. And then there's kind of another piece to it, which happens in February, which will be asking people to then help us analyse the images that have come back. So you'll be able to sign up to greatreefcensus.org, and then you'll get an image that might have come from one of the reefs.
It's going to be more. It's going to be simpler for you, more effective, or at least greater numbers if international tourism opens up, right? And that's not on the cards for Australia.
Yeah, no, next year will be more opened up, and then probably the year after. I mean, basically we're trying. Last year we did a pilot run with 5 reefs. This year I reckon we'll end up doing about 150 reefs. Next year we're trying to do between 300 and 500 reefs. So actually next year, as important as international tourists will be, getting the recreational fishing community involved, particularly the reef. So
yeah,
there's many challenges, and
but the model's been, I think, used. It's obviously not identical, but I think it is perhaps the biggest single citizen science project in the world. Is just getting numbers and movements of birds, and bird watchers now, by submitting their lists online, getting a really clear picture of where birds are found and when they move in and out of there. We're getting some what will long-term be incredible data on birds and how they move around and how they're being affected by climate change. In Britain, where there's bird watching's been a thing for a very long time, there's empirical proof that birds are breeding later, they're moving later on their migrations, and that's attributable to climate change.
Yeah, one of the inspirations behind this was the Great Elephant Census.
Okay, yeah.
Different model, but it was the idea of, I mean, that Great Elephant Census is a census, but we were looking at that and going, okay, so again, it's sort of distributed responsibility for getting numbers, and so I think we probably took that to a sort of slightly different, maybe a different angle on it or whatever, but it was that combination of the kind of Earth Hour gives the people to help you do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Things like Spring Watch in the UK, where they've
huge. Yeah.
So I think that's something really interesting if you're thinking about how do you scale up conservation globally. A big part of it is going to be this whole field, and not least because the big data is interesting, important, and helps you manage the reef. But also, it actually starts to reconnect people with nature. And even though maybe at a digital level at the moment, I fervently believe that the need to connect people, even our friend Dwayne in Indiana. I bet you that Dwayne doesn't mind going out with his rifle and hunting, and he quite digs being out in nature, whether or not he's hunting being a different sort of thing. But it's that whole thing of the more you connect with nature, the stronger your advocacy for it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, we have another tradition on Deep in the Bush where every single session finishes with some good news. What's some good news you've got for us? It's been a year of really mixed news, mainly bad. Give us some good news. It's dismaying you have to think so hard.
No, not really. I was trying to think how to say it, really. But basically, I was out. I think many people around the world think the reef is gone. It's something that comes up all the time, And it really. I was out on Tuesday last week, and I'm out again on Friday this week. And you get in the water, and there are some bits that are degraded, but there are still these fucking incredible places, and you can't help but kind of just marvel in how extraordinary planet Earth can be.
Yeah,
and it still is.
Yeah.
And I think for all the bad news that we've had this year, and it's been a shitty year for so many people, the one thing that for me that I keep coming back to is this idea that humanity has proven its capacity to move and change quickly. And it does it rarely, but every now and again it does it. And maybe the last time was 1939 or 1940. Or maybe the last time, it's been a long while. But, humanity often takes a long while to give itself a kick up the arse, but it can do it. And it's a privilege to be able to say that the reef, the Great Barrier Reef, is something that is still extraordinary, and it is within our hands if we move fast enough, quick enough, and with enough perseverance and determination to keep it that way. So, don't give up, eh?
That's it. Yeah, I mean, it's great that it's not in palliative care; that it's something we can bring back.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, and good luck with Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef. People should look that up. Cut and paste this video link. Have a look at this extraordinary project. There's some artful bikini shots in there as well if you want to turn up just for that.
I thought it looked all right. A lot of people were critical of that shot, but
Well, it wasn't you in the bikini, so that's why I think worth watching.
They cut that shot out, did they?
Yeah, they definitely did. No need for budgie smugglers. That saves nothing. That's conservation for the blind only, I think. Thank you very much. Good luck with Citizen of the Great Barrier Reef, and I hope I can come out and visit you soon. Give my love to the family.
We'd look after you.
Yes, indeed. And I get to do my bird watching on land and then fish watching in the water. It's perfect.
I've forgotten that you're such a
I'm not a twitcher. That's a different thing. Twitchers chase birds that are just out of place. That's silly.
Just by the by, like, yes, Tammy very well.
Yeah.
My wife, that is. She's become a massive birdo.
Good. You live in far north Queensland. It's an extraordinary place for it. There's beautiful birds up there.
It's very strange. I'm sorry, but
I know. It's a miracle I've ever had sex. It's a very unappealing pastime, but I think I have at least twice. So, not with your wife though. There you are.
That's why you're allowed to keep parrots.
On which note, thanks very much, and we will chat again soon.
Really nice to see you, mate.
Okay, bye.
Cheers, mate.